and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Skaya. In the past few days, Kyiv and other regions have been hit by long power cuts, leaving people without light, heat, or internet, as Russian strikes and an overworked grid take their toll. At the same time, anti-corruption investigators are digging into Energoatom and other state energy companies over fresh allegations of corruption. Now, joining me now to discuss these latest developments is Ryhor Nizhnikau, Senior Researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to the program. Now, Ryhor, do tell me, how has Ukraine, first of all, managed to keep power flowing to major cities, despite all these continuous Russian strikes?
Well, this is not the first winter this happens, right? So Ukrainians has been preparing. There's been a lot of EU investment in the area. There've been a lot of decentralization of energy flow. So Russians cannot take off all of the grid right away. But of course, they are targeting now some of the areas, which means that some are particularly affected.
Now, how effective do you think that Ukrenergo and city authorities were in restoring electricity, water pressures, and what lessons can others learn from their response?
Again, this is not the first year, not the first winter when Ukrainian authorities face this. So I think they've been quite efficient. Obviously, the extent of, at least as some experts, energy experts, which unfortunately I'm not, indicate, they've been, of course, really targeted to make the major impact on Ukraine and some of its core facilities, including the nuclear power plants functioning. Nevertheless, it has not yet been as successful as Russians wish so, but it's not the end of it, right?
Let me ask you this. To what extent, Ryhor, has grid overloading contributed to blackouts? And do you think that corruption within the energy sector to be a factor in these failures?
Well, yes, in a sense, now we move closer to what I'm more prepared to discuss the political the direct consequences of corruption and political, countries in Ukraine, the problem of governance, and obviously it contributed, right? So we do see from all these tapes and the fact that all this corruption has been happening in Energoatom, the key Ukraine's energy producer, shows that it directly affected the function of the company, despite what Energoatom claims today. So the whole fact that there have been stealing and corruption dealings on the from, for instance, the build-up of the facilities to protect energy objects has affected, but the whole scope of how much it has affected is up to the Ukraine's prosecution and authorities to uncover during the trial.
Tell us a little bit more about that, if you can go into details. For instance, what do these searches at Energoatom and, of course, former energy minister offices reveal about oversight and accountability in the energy sector?
Look, the problem is, on one hand, is not a surprise because we've been, or at least in Ukraine, they have a good understanding that energy sector has always been dirty. It's always been used by the incumbents and for corrupt schemes. I think what really and we remember what has been happening this year, including this idea to buy the Bulgarian nuclear blocks, so-called Bulgarian because they would be coming from Russia. In a sense, it's quite big in Ukraine. I think what has been really shocking to Ukrainian expert circles in society are actually not the fact of corruption, but the fact that they've been directly linked with Russia. That Andrei Derkach, for instance, and his people were involved. That the fact that money from these corruption schemes some of the money ended up in Moscow has been really a shock to most.
I mean, it's quite peculiar. I mean that there's a war going on, and suddenly these scandals pop up. What is Zelensky's take on all of this?
We have to see, because he has to produce a reaction, given that some of his, let's say, his business partner is directly involved, Timur Mindich, and some of the his government's ministers, the current Minister of Defense and the current Minister of Justice, are involved, or at least are allegedly part of that. So he has to show that corruption in his inner circle is a mistake, and he's ready to fight for it. But I have to say that despite that, it's still a question that Zelensky has absolutely no implications in this. That he as the president is clean and not involved. It's just that his inner circle is corrupt, and if he doesn't start reacting to that some taint will end up on his shoulders.
But I mean, speaking of that, I mean, I know that you're saying that Zelensky is not involved. However, could the exposure of this alleged, of course, corruption network actually weaken public trust in him moving forward and in his government?
Well, I think there is a probability that we may see that in the future. Not yet. That's what I'm saying, that not yet. He is anyhow seen as a part of this corruption. But the problem is that this is the governance that he chairs and to a certain degree created. These are the people that he brought in. So at some point, if it doesn't stop, if he doesn't react, if he doesn't change his style of governance inside the country, at some point people will clearly directly link it to Zelensky, albeit we also still have to say, as long as the war continues, as long as no election can be held, people will, this will not challenge Zelensky, because people understand that the war and Russia are bigger threats than corruption.
Ryhor, is this something that we should have expected, or did this completely come out of the blue?
No, I think that's not a surprise. And it's not a surprise given that this summer, the anti-corruption agencies, NABU and SAB, were directly assaulted by the authorities to cut off their independence. So people knew that big investigations are ongoing, and we knew that these investigations were ongoing against Zelensky's inner circle. So it doesn't come as a surprise. As I said, the only surprise is that the extent of involvement of Russian agents in this. This is something that people still could understand.
Let me ask you something. What about, recently, former President Petro Poroshenko lashed out at Zelensky. Isn't this somehow related together? Could this be one of these scenarios?
No, let's put it. Poroshenko was also, and his inner circle was involved in exactly corruption schemes in the energy sector. But I think what Poroshenko was under investigation and prosecution by the current authorities. But what this to me indicates is rather that politics is back in Ukraine, that we don't have elections, we cannot have elections, but the political processes are there. So, and that's why it's actually quite an interesting development in the war times.
Let me ask you this. How do you think these corruption allegations might affect the Ukraine's progress towards EU membership?
There is no progress. I'm sorry to say this, but what we can see is that the latest Commission's report actually quite positive, right? but we see progress in areas which do not really concern the fundamentals. So Commission is very careful and to a certain degree reacts in a very muted way towards these problems. For obvious reasons, Europe understands security and war comes first, and they also don't want to destabilize Ukraine. But we don't really see much progress in the area of fundamentals, and as long as Ukraine progresses in other areas, we've seen some progress, obviously, in especially social economic areas, national bank and so on. But as long as it doesn't perform area, including the judicial system and so on, there can't be European accession. So that's, to me, is the issue. But
what kind of reforms are we looking at?
Anti-corruption. Well, I mean, I mentioned judiciary. That's I mean, a massive step forward, right? The same comes with the security sector reforms. Also anti-corruption infrastructure. It's actually quite shows quite its efficiency with this particular case. But there is much more to do, right? So it's all this work has to be done, and we are not even talking about political reforms, continuation of decentralization. I think the Commission is now more concerned how to avoid backtracking rather than how to really move forward. I think this, they think, can be left for after the war.
And we'll see how all this plays out in the near future. Thank you so much, Ryhor Nizhnikau, a senior researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, for being with us here on World Talks.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this episode. I'm Skaya. See you next time.